Okay, I think we're ready to get things going. Natalie?
Okay. Hi,
Awesome.
everyone.
So I'll just do some introduction stuff and then we can get this going. Yeah.
All right.
So NUN Impact is a global youth NGO that advances Model UN and the UN Sustainable Development Goals through virtual programs and events. Today, as part of our Global Week of Action event, we are delighted to introduce Natalie Olivas from Regeneración, a US-based NGO, to speak on climate justice in the Pajaro Valley. So I'm going to quickly introduce our speaker and our topic today. So Natalie Olivas is the community organizer at Regeneración, where she helps to build community capacity to advocate for equitable climate action. Her childhood exposed her to the extreme outcomes of environmental degradation, which drove her to pursue a career in environmental justice. She works across sectors to interweave climate justice into various programs and curriculums. Natalie has experience working with local governments, business, and nonprofits in policy analysis, meeting and analyzing sustainability goals, and education and outreach. Her mission to help build equitable and sustainable communities while centering the needs of historically marginalized and oppressed groups. So today's topic on climate justice in the Pajaro Valley. Natalie's mission at Regeneración is to help build the community of Pajaro Valley and to help them adapt and flourish as the climate changes. Regeneración co-creates a place-based response to climate change by centering those on the front lines of climate impacts at the center of creating and driving solutions. They approach the climate crisis through a social and environmental justice lens. And so today, we will discuss how climate impacts are being experienced by the community in the Pajaro Valley and their work to adapt to and mitigate those impacts. We will also explore community responsibility and how we can collectively further equitable climate action. Okay, with that said, if throughout the session, if you guys wish to ask any questions, go ahead and drop them in the chat box. Natalie, depending on how you want to do things, you can either answer them as you see them or just like answer them at the end of the session, but it's up to you.
Okay, if I can't see the questions while I'm presenting, can you just interrupt me or
would you rather just like have me save those questions till the end of your presentation?
Yeah, we can do the end.
Okay, awesome.
Okay.
And then one more thing. So throughout the next 1 week of our GWOA session, we're having a 100 Deeds challenge for different various actions for SDG 13. This was made by a bunch of our climate partners, and we'd really appreciate it if you guys participated in the challenge. So just to quickly share this document, we have an amazing brochure filled with all the various actions, individual actions that you can take, such as recycling or choosing not to use motor transportation, and a bunch of different great suggestions here. So please check it out. And once you do so, once you've completed some of these actions, definitely we'd greatly appreciate it if you share what you did in this link that I'm going to be copying right now and pasting in the chat box. So this is our deed submission portal. So we'd greatly appreciate it if you guys can put your deeds in there once you're done. Save the link. And with that being said, go ahead, Natalie. We're glad to have you here with us.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here. I would love to learn a little bit more about everyone who's here. So if y'all could share in the chat, or we could go around and say where you're calling from and your favorite thing to do outside. Let's go ahead and put that in the chat. I would love to know more about you all. I know I saw people calling in from India. So great to have y'all here. I will share that I'm calling in from California, and my favorite thing to do outside is ride my bike. Eat street food, nice. All right, well, I'll take a look at some of those answers later on. Okay. Yeah, so Matthew gave a little introduction about me, but I will share a little bit more. So I'm the community organizer with Regeneración, and we are a climate action organization. And when most people think of climate and the environment, they think of melting polar ice caps and saving the rainforest or recycling. But I think of people. I grew up in California's Central Valley, where we consistently ranked highest for the most polluted air in the nation because of emissions caused by oil and gas extraction and industrial agriculture. Growing up, my siblings and I all had respiratory issues. So when I think of environmental justice, I think about my family and my communities. And I think of Watsonville, where our predominantly Latinx population are already on the front lines of climate impacts. So our mission at Regeneración is to help the community of the Pajaro Valley adapt and flourish as the climate changes. We believe this is important so that everyone can thrive and live in harmony with the natural world. And I'll say that our work is distinct in that we approach climate action in an intersectional way, meaning acknowledging the various social injustices that are intertwined with driving the climate crisis. That is to say that nothing or no one exists separate from their identities, and race and class directly influence how people experience climate impacts. So a little bit about climate justice. I'm going to go into how people in the Pajaro Valley are experiencing climate impacts in the different intersectional ways that these issues can compound. So climate change is more than just an environmental issue, right? It's a public health emergency, and more people are being killed, displaced, and injured, and impacts will continue to cause food and water shortages worldwide. And the climate crisis is the symptom of a much larger problem, which is the exploitation of people, land, and natural resources. The exploitation of land and people are what have led us to such a devastating moment in history, from devastating wildfires here in California to the movement to end systemic racial injustices, all alongside a global pandemic. 2020 was a year full of converging crises. And, you know, in the Pajaro Valley where we live, COVID cases are starting to decline and we are making progress towards immunity, but we will continue to deal with the lasting repercussions of the pandemic, extreme economic hardship, the continuation of record-breaking temperatures and unprecedented wildfires. And all of these are disproportionately affecting farm workers and their families. So when I say the Pajaro Valley in Watsonville, Watsonville is the city and Pajaro Valley is kind of the region around it. And it's a frontline community that's already experiencing the firsthand impacts of climate change. It's a primarily low-income agricultural town with an 85% Latino population. And so climate change in the Pajaro Valley looks a lot like extreme heat, and extreme heat can cause heat-related illnesses, especially on people who work outside. And like I said, it's primarily an agricultural community. The way that we grow some of our crops, we grow a lot of berries and cannabis, which can sometimes be grown under plastic. And underneath that plastic, it can be 10 to 15 degrees hotter. And then we are also experiencing a lot of storms, and we're going through a drought right now, which can increase or affect the growing and production of some of our crops. And wildfires are also a serious problem here in California, which can lead to the destruction of homes and increased pollution in our area. There are also, like I said, these intersectional ways that people are being affected. So we have high exposure to pesticides. Farm workers are often paid by the piece, so they really have to exert themselves to, you know, make more money. They have to work long days, and often aren't subjected to, you know, the same worker protections that the rest of us have in California. Undocumented workers particularly can face the threat of deportation. And like I mentioned, they have much less rights in the workplace, so they often make lower wages and don't get overtime pay, even though they're working these really long days. During the pandemic, undocumented immigrants were left out of the federal relief stimulus package, despite contributing billions of dollars in tax revenue. And also this work is seasonal. So we are in the harvest season from about, April to late summer. However, in the winter, many farm workers, aren't working and aren't making a paycheck. Um, and so there's also the risk of decreased work during the harvest season because of lack of demand. So that can be from things like crops spoiling because of high heat, or the harvest not being good enough from droughts and things like that. During the pandemic, many farm worker families had family members being laid off from non-essential jobs, and the worsening financial security um, of those impacts. So in response to what we saw here in the Pajaro Valley and people experiencing these impacts, Regeneración was founded in early 2016 through a series of conversations with community leaders, high school students, parents, city council members, and Regeneración emerged to address climate change as a social justice issue and to show the community the local impacts and engage to build resilience here in Watsonville. Some of our initial projects included murals, video research, projects, and other forms of community outreach. And the Generación was founded as a collaborative community effort. One of those community members was our director, Nancy Falstick, who is in this picture and I believe is also here today. And we're a relatively small organization made up of only 4 staff members at the moment. However, we're able to have a tremendous impact by working with a lot of community partners, such as our local schools, and we have a really wonderful pool of dedicated volunteers. So in early 2017, our team decided to conduct a community-based research project in order to find out how our local community is being affected by pollution and environmental changes, and to learn what solutions people believe would be most beneficial and relevant to our community. And so what we found as the top concerns and key findings, besides what you can see here on the screen, is that number one, people noticed that there were environmental changes going on in the Pajaro Valley, and number two, they observed that these issues affect groups of people differently and disproportionately. And number three, we found that there's a strong desire to take personal and collective action. And so some other findings, 74% of agricultural workers, their families or neighbors experience extreme heat conditions at their workplace. So this finding led our work to focus on how we can best protect the farm working community from experiencing the extreme impacts of climate change. So we developed brochures outlining how workers can best protect themselves from heat illnesses, and made the connection between the increasing amount of heat waves and the changing climate driven by emissions. We shared this information through various mediums, including working with community partners such as local clinics, food banks, and radio stations to get the word out. And in August of last year, we hosted a forum focusing on how farm workers can be at the center of solutions for combating climate change. It featured a lineup of all Latinx speakers, including politicians, farm owners, farm workers, doctors, and educators. And so here I have a video that we featured during our forum, and it features a local farm worker, and he recounts his experience on what it's been like for him, working in these extreme conditions. So Let me see if I can get this to play.
Hola, mi nombre es Juan y he tenido la dicha de haber trabajado en la rama de la agricultura.
Natalia,
Yeah.
the audio is not, the video is not audible.
I'm
What was
sorry
that?
to interrupt, but it's inaudible.
Sorry, maybe could you try like sharing with the audio function on?
So I can actually just the audio is really quiet, but it's also in Spanish. But there's subtitles, so I can just keep
Okay.
the audio low.
Okay, yeah, that works. Yeah.
Pajaro, la ciudad de Watson, Mora, la presa. Ahorita estoy trabajando en
It would be better if you turn on the,
últimos
the subtitles.
toda la rama de la agricultura.
Can you all see the subtitles at the top?
Yes. Yes, they are completely visible and fine. Go ahead.
Campos están muy resecos por falta de agua. Por mi parte, yo he sido afectado más que nada por la calor, se vienen muchas cosas que el cuerpo no puede resistir. A mí me salió mucha sangre, mucha gente se desmayaba. El agua no es suficiente para calmar la calor. Hay que recibir atención médica. Trabajaba en Sonora, dentro de los túneles bajo el plástico. Todo el tiempo es 10-12 grados más caliente que lo normal. Más o menos del 2000 al 2005, o sea, hubo mucho daño por el sol, por la calor, el sobrecalentamiento. Mucha fruta no se logró, se echó a perder. Mi ingreso fue afectado en la forma de que hace mucha calor, la fruta se echa a perder, el producto, te cambian los horarios, muchas veces pleno mediodía te sacan de trabajar para que no te haga daño. Quisiera decirle a la comunidad, a la gente, que tengan conciencia de los que trabajamos en el campo, porque por nosotros llevamos frutas, verduras a la mesa. Necesitamos tener mejores sueldos, mejores de seguro. Llevamos mucha friega en el campo y somos los menos pagados. Para vivir con dignidad, un trabajador agrícola necesita mejores sueldos, mejores aseguranzas médicas, que no más cubra a la pareja, ya sea la esposa o el esposo, que cubra a los hijos y un poco más de respeto hacia las personas. Ok, para cerrar esta entrevista, solo quiero decirle a la gente que tenga conciencia, que lean, miren videos sobre el calentamiento global. Existe y nos está dañando a nosotros como personas. Solo les digo, piensen en sus hijos, en sus nietos, piensen en el futuro de ellos, no hagan cosas que esté dañando el planeta, porque en realidad todo nos está dañando. Gracias. Hola, mi nombre es Juan.
I always get stuck on this part. Yeah, so we were really honored to have Juan. Something that we believe is really central to our mission and our work is to really put farm workers at the center of solution, and not just farm workers, but all of these people who are on the front lines and are being the most affected. I think what can happen a lot of the times is that people in our capitals and our lawmakers and politicians can come up with solutions, but when they're not on the ground, they really don't know how these things will impact us. So we strategized on what solutions would look like in our area. We collaborated with farm workers, educators, growers, and health professionals. And there is no silver bullet when it comes to climate action. And so that's why we really want to emphasize this place-based approach and plan with our community on what they want healthy and sustainable communities to look like. We involve people on the ground, but we also do work with state legislators because individual action or policy alone will not work. We really need to combine all of those efforts and get every sector and person involved. And so another huge way to participate in climate action is by engaging in local government. So we held a local city council candidate forum focusing on climate and equity because we wanted to ensure that our local politicians are thinking about how residents are being impacted and how we can include equity in all of our decision making. So this is a screenshot from our November or September City Council Candidate Forum. And we had a lot of community members show up. So it was a really great way to share space. Another big goal of ours is to inform our community about the reality of the climate emergency, the effects of climate impacts on local residents, and actions everyone can take to reduce emissions and participate in a just transition off of fossil fuels to a society powered by renewable energy. So we have handouts like this. They're all in English and Spanish. We also have a few on how to eat a plant-rich diet, and they feature, local resources where people can get, local, affordable or free food in our community. And this is our heat stress brochure that we share primarily with farm workers. Similarly, this one shares resources where farm workers can go visit food banks or clinics that are more affordable, and other organizations that really focus on helping farm workers and their families. And this is the other side, explaining how farm workers can best protect themselves from extreme heat and what to do in case of emergencies. And then this year, we hosted another Climate of Hope forum, this time focusing on women, girls, and climate justice. We featured Indigenous voices from our area, as well as Indigenous voices from Mexico. And we highlighted women's leadership as women are also often disproportionately affected by climate impacts and are often least represented in climate work. And another big thing that we wanted to do is promote accessibility in our area by providing interpretation into Spanish and Mixteco, which is an indigenous language from Mexico that is commonly spoken here. So these are some of the amazing women that we featured in our forum. So we had speakers from agriculture to engineering to architecture. So it really held, we really had a really rich conversation. And so Regeneración is not just increasing awareness about climate change and social justice, but we also want to create pathways to leadership for young people. So we host a monthly Young Environmental Justice Activist meeting. And that's because, climate work and climate activism can get really exhausting and it can feel like you have the weight of the world on your shoulders. So this is an opportunity for young people to get together and, share what they've been working on, get advice from their peers, and kind of just a place to vent about any of your frustration or successes or things like that. We also host an advocacy committee made up of regular volunteers. We primarily focus on city council and local and state policy. Another big project of ours has been influencing city budget and local ordinances. We've done things like oppose fossil fuel projects and advocate for affordable housing. And these things might not seem like, obvious climate actions, but these are the types of things that really intersect how people experience climate impacts. So like if you don't have housing, and you're living outside, that's going to impact how you're experiencing things like extreme heat and other, extreme weather. And so last week, our advocacy committee also held a webinar thinking about how we can redistribute and reallocate funds in our community. So in Watsonville, over 40% of our general fund goes to policing. Meanwhile, departments like Public Works, Parks and Community Services, and Community Development are each at 10% or below of our general fund. And money for policing is money that is not spent on funding climate adaptation or mitigation or the real root causes of our societal issues. And so these are some examples of our other advocacy efforts. So sometimes they're things like specific propositions, and then other times they're informational, like what's on the Watsonville ballot, what do the different roles mean in our local elected government. Another big project we're working on is our Clean Mobility Survey. So this summer we will be working to really go out there and ask people, door to door, what they want clean mobility to look like in their area. And again, this is another example of how we really want people to come up with solutions themselves and not, one person decide what's best for everyone. We are also working on helping low-income families and people get into electric vehicles. In our county, transportation emissions make up like 60 to 70% of our total emissions, which is, a lot higher than the rest of the state. So electrifying transportation is a really key part in meeting our climate goals. And I will say that every single person buying a brand new electric car is not a sustainable response. However, to meet state and local climate goals, we do need people to consider electric as an option over gas-powered vehicles. So this project is a part of the solution to reduce transportation emissions, combined with our other advocacy efforts like improving public transportation. And so there's also the justice aspect of transportation. Black and brown communities like Watsonville breathe in disproportionate amounts of air pollution, and disadvantaged communities have done the least to cause the climate crisis. However, this is another really great example of how we can be leading solutions. And electric vehicles are affordable and the least polluting car on the market, and the cost of them are going down and the incentives are going up, which makes them, more affordable than gas cars. And, they're better for the community, can improve air quality. And a little bit more about community responsibility. We really want to reduce the impacts of climate change in our community, and we have a couple different ways that you can do this. So, you can reduce your your personal consumption of fossil fuels while also advocating for, the end of fossil fuel companies like exploitation of the planet. We can continue to vote for politicians that prioritize human lives, and we can also think about running for these offices ourselves, advocating for adequate protections, and that can be as simple as sharing something on social media and then following up with like a petition or a letter to your representatives. Yeah, and we can really demand more from our politicians and hold them accountable because yeah. And then you can donate to your local organizations, and that can be climate, but it can also be the other social organizations that really help people in their day-to-day lives, like I said, in the intersectional ways that we experience climate impacts. So from here, I was hoping we could go into breakout rooms and maybe share a little bit something similar to what I talked about in my presentation. So I was hoping that we could all share more about ourselves and our personal identities. And then number two, how you've seen climate impacts in your life. Relationship with the land, and really thinking about how we can give back to our soil. Because, when you do organic farming, you're not always thinking about how you can best nurture the soil. Like, you can use certain kinds of pesticides and, there's just more rules. But if you're not really thinking about long-term caring of the planet and, our soils, then yeah.
For sure, yeah, definitely. That's a great perspective on it. I think the general consensus that room came to is there needs to be sort of a balance between the science, the new, and the old.
Mhm.
Are there any more questions from the people in the room today? Okay, Kabir, all right. So how do you think megacities like New York and Mumbai can eradicate global warming and climate change? Because there is a rise of infrastructure and a boatload of population and politics, and also because electric cars remain out of budget for many here in India.
Can eradicate. So yeah, I don't think it'll be up to like any city alone to respond to climate change. It's definitely like a global thing, but I think in order to like adapt and mitigate, we can begin to move towards, emissionless, like things like transportation, which can be a huge source of emissions. And electric cars can, be out of budget for individual families, but I think we can advocate for things like, affordable, sustainable transportation. And yeah, I think just, I think locally is like a big place or one of the main places where you can start to respond and like adapt to climate impacts, because where you live is really where you're going to see those impacts. So thinking with your like cities, how like how are buildings and like roads going to be affected with climate change, and really starting to prepare beforehand, and really get like ahead of these problems instead of kind of reacting to them.
Absolutely. Yusuf asked, do you think that eco-friendly farming will heavily impact the agricultural production? So, okay.
So eco-friendly farming will heavily impact the agricultural production. I think that it's starting to. I think that people are starting to see, the negative impacts of industrial agriculture, and people are starting to, prefer the eco, pesticide-free produce and things like that. But I think we're going to need like a much larger systems change and like more people demanding like eco-friendly farming, versus kind of just waiting for the consumer preference to shift.
And we have another question about automation. So maybe, do you think excessive use of machines, this is maybe more of an economics question, I'm not sure. Do you think the excessive use of machines are replacing the jobs of many farmers? Maybe if we can try and relate this to like a climate change perspective. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I'll just say that from when I've talked to some of the growers and farmers in our area, like there's still a lot of things that the machines can't do, and there's still a lack of, or there's still a need for more farm workers. So yeah, I think like there's a lot of crops, especially in our area, like, picking strawberries is not really something that can be done by a machine. So that's just what I know from the experience in my area.
For sure. On my end, I actually had a question myself. So you mentioned there's a lot of local government action taking place where you're from. And so maybe could you give us examples of like legislation or ordinances that were passed locally that have helped work towards climate justice?
Mhm. Okay, for some reason, like legislation isn't coming to mind, but I can tell you about some of the big projects that our cities are working on. So right now we're updating our climate action and adaptation plan with a 30-year, foresight, I believe. So really thinking long term about both, how are we going to respond to climate impacts, and then also how are we going to reduce our emissions to eventually transition off of fossil fuels. And so that's one of the main ones, but also thinking of more things like infrastructure and other environmental what's the word, like other natural disasters, like things like earthquakes and stuff. Our city has been updating like the local hazard mitigation plan to think about, how our buildings are going to be affected, how our roads are going to be affected, and thinking about, where is the money coming from to fund the retrofitting of, our buildings and things like that.
I could add a couple things. Some of the cities around here have declared a climate emergency. I would love to see on the national level. I think there's at least one country in the world that has declared a climate emergency, and that could make possible taking action more swiftly. So that's something I think for all of us to think about and to encourage politicians around us to consider. And not in our city, but a nearby city did pass something saying any new building construction, like new homes, have to be electrified, not have gas as part of the systems in the house. So it's possible to do things like that moving forward. It's the state of California is passing a lot of legislation with both protections and helping with natural disasters and dedicating a lot of money towards building resilient communities.
Okay, I think we'll take one last question from Abira. Basically, they asked how developing countries which need industrial development can have that development without, affecting the environment too much. So how can we sort of balance the two?
Yeah, I think it's really finding like new ways to develop countries and kind of moving away from, this Western-centered previous focus on the development of fossil fuels and, things like oil and monoculture, because, we've seen that, this quote unquote development has really come at the cost of human lives in our area. So I think that once we start to think about building communities centered around like things like renewable energy, and agriculture, that's actually good for the land, we can think about like kind of like reframing what development means.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think I recall this is from something I read, but like there's a surprising amount of good alternatives to like various industrial activities that people just don't realize. But once industries start to adopt those, we can still have, production and development, but still keeping in mind the environment for sure.
Yeah. Can I add one thought? I think we need to really think about what do people need? What do people need to lead healthy, long lives? And some of the things that we want really don't make sense. So it's like we need to kind of question our lifestyles and think about everything in the context of maintaining a livable environment. And I'm confident that we can do that and that there are enough resources to go around to protect everybody's life. But the way things are set up is not working very well.
Yeah, maybe the key takeaway for our group is, how can we get involved? If you guys have any suggestions, or even how can we as, an international community get involved with Regeneración, if you guys are willing to share.
Yeah, I can share a little bit, and then maybe Nancy, if you have more. I'm dropping the website in there so you can stay up to date with us there. Yeah, but I think, in terms of like general climate action, I would say like, you know, everyone has a part like based on their own like individual actions and skills. So like not everyone has to be like a climate organizer. Like, you know, if you're an artist or a writer, like, you know, you can find new ways to like participate through your like interests and skill set.
Yeah, I agree. And just talking with people around you, helping everybody understand the actual situation, and then listening to people's ideas for, okay, how can we get to where we are protecting a sustainable world? And you can do that on any level with your family members, your friends. You can talk to people who are in government positions. But in terms of being involved with us, yeah, we would welcome you to follow us on social media, comment, share your perspectives of what's happening around you. So we have international discussions going on online. That would be really exciting. If our handouts are useful, you can download them. You could make your own using some of those ideas and adapting it to what's happening around you. And if you were interested in, I don't know if it's the right time, it's probably not the right time, but if you were interested in visiting our young adult group and just seeing what we do there and maybe thinking about starting your own, could certainly contact Natalie about that.
Definitely. I think it'd be great, because from the breakout session, some of us mentioned we come from farming communities, maybe drawing connections between what's going on in Pajaro Valley and other farming communities around the world would also be a great opportunity. Yeah. Okay, so as we end out today's session, just real quick, wanted to get a picture of all of us in the room. So please turn on your cameras if you're willing to do so, and then I'll just take a quick screenshot. Okay.
Matthew, sorry to interrupt you. Can you share these pictures with us as well? We
Yeah,
would like to keep it as a memorial for us.
for sure. We can send it out to the mailing list after
Yes.
this. Yeah, for sure.
Thank you.
Everybody, smile. Cheese. All right, there we go. Thank you so much. Okay, so just last things, closing comments. So we're still having our 100 Deeds challenge. If you're looking for ways to get involved, please check out the 100 Deeds challenge brochure here. And if you choose to accomplish any of the actions that we've described in the challenge, we'd really appreciate it if you submitted your actions to our portal, which is the second link there. And also do check out the links Natalie dropped, the Regeneración website, as well as the Instagram tag. So any closing comments, maybe Natalie and Nancy, and we'll end things out for today.
Just that I am super thankful that y'all are having me, and so thankful for everyone who showed up and are really committing to learning more and talking about climate action. We are the future.
Yeah, it's so exciting to meet people in other places that care, just as much, and to know that there's millions of us around the world, and that we can do this. We can protect our planet, protect people's lives.
Awesome. In that case, that's a great message to end off on. Thank you, everybody, for coming today. Please, join us in any of our future sessions, participate in any of our events, and stay tuned for more MUN-Impact related activities. Thank you all. Have a good day.
Thank you.
you.
So good to meet you.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.